Chapter 27 of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 27. Pinocchio is arrested by the gendarmes. When he arrived on the shore, Pinocchio looked out to sea, but he saw no dogfish. The sea was as smooth as a great crystal mirror. "Where is the dogfish?" he asked, turning to his companions. "He must have gone to have his breakfast," said one of them, laughing. "Or he has thrown himself on his bed to have a little nap," added another, laughing still louder. From their absurd answers and silly laughter, Pinocchio perceived that his companions had been making a fool of him in inducing him to believe a tale with no truth in it. Taking it very badly, he said to them angrily, "And now, may I ask what fun you could find in deceiving me with the story of the dogfish?" "Oh, it was great fun," answered the little rascals in chorus. "And in what did it consist?" "In making you miss school and persuading you to come with us. Are you not ashamed of being so punctual and so diligent with your lessons? Are you not ashamed of studying so hard?" "And if I study hard, what concern is it of yours?" "It concerns us excessively, because it makes us appear in a bad light to the master." "Why?" "Because boys who study make those who, like us, have no wish to learn, seem worse by comparison, and that is too bad. We too have our pride." "Then what must I do to please you?" "You must follow our example and hate school, lessons, and the master, our three greatest enemies." "And if I wish to continue my studies?" "In that case we will have nothing more to do with you, and at the first opportunity we will make you pay for it." "Really," said the puppet, shaking his head, "you make me inclined to laugh." "Hey, Pinocchio!" shouted the biggest of the boys, confronting him. "None of your superior airs! Don't come here to crow over us, for if you are not afraid of us, we are not afraid of you. Remember that you are one against 7 of us." "7 like the 7 deadly sins," said Pinocchio with a shout of laughter. "Listen to him! He has insulted us all. He called us the 7 deadly sins." "Take that to begin with, and keep it for your supper tonight," said one of the boys, and so saying he gave him a blow on the head with his fist. But it was give and take, for the puppet, as was to be expected, immediately returned the blow, and the fight in a moment became general and desperate. Pinocchio, although he was one alone, defended himself like a hero. He used his feet, which were of the hardest wood, to such purpose that he kept his enemies at a respectful distance. Wherever they touched, they left a bruise by way of reminder. The boys, becoming furious at not being able to measure themselves hand to hand with the puppet, had recourse to other weapons. Loosening their satchels, they commenced throwing their school books at him. Grammars, dictionaries, spelling books, geography books, and other scholastic works. But Pinocchio was quick and had sharp eyes, and always managed to duck in time, so that the books passed over his head and all fell into the sea. Imagine the astonishment of the fish. Thinking that the books were something to eat, they all arrived in shoals, but having tasted a page or two, or a frontispiece, they spat it out quickly and made a wry face that seemed to say, "It isn't food for us. We are accustomed to something much better." The battle, meantime, had become fiercer than ever, when a big crab, who had come out of the water and had climbed slowly up on the shore, called out in a hoarse voice that sounded like a trumpet with a bad cold, "Have done with that, you young ruffians, for you are nothing else. These hand-to-hand fights between boys seldom finish well. Some disaster is sure to happen." Poor Crab! He might as well have preached to the wind. Even that young rascal, Pinocchio, turning around, looked at him mockingly and said rudely, "Hold your tongue, you tiresome crab! You had better suck some licorice lozenges to cure that cold in your throat." Just then the boys, who had no more books of their own to throw, spied at a little distance the satchel that belonged to Pinocchio, and took possession of it. Amongst the books there was one bound in strong cardboard, with the back and points of parchment. It was a treatise on arithmetic. One of the boys seized this volume, and, aiming at Pinocchio's head, threw it at him with all the force he could muster. But instead of hitting the puppet, it struck one of his companions on the temple, who, turning as white as a sheet, said only, "Oh, mother, help, I am dying," and fell his whole length on the sand. Thinking he was dead, the terrified boys ran off as hard as their legs could carry them, and in a few minutes they were out of sight. But Pinocchio remained. Although from grief and fright he was more dead than alive, nevertheless he ran and soaked his handkerchief in the sea, and began to bathe the temples of his poor schoolfellow. Crying bitterly in his despair, he kept calling him by name and saying to him, "Eugene, my poor Eugene, open your eyes and look at me. Why do you not answer? I did not do it. Indeed, it was not I that hurt you so. Believe me, it was not. Open your eyes, Eugene. If you keep your eyes shut, I shall die too. Oh, what shall I do? How shall I ever return home? Oh, how can I ever have the courage to go back to my good mamma? What will become of me? Where can I fly to? Oh, how much better it would have been, 1,000 times better, if I had only gone to school. Oh, why did I listen to my companions? They have been my ruin. The master said to me, and my mamma repeated it often, 'Beware of bad companions.' Oh dear, what will become of me? What will become of me? What will become of me?" And Pinocchio began to cry and to sob, and to strike his head with his fists, and to call poor Eugene by his name. Suddenly he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He turned and saw 2 soldiers. "What are you doing there, lying on the ground?" they asked Pinocchio. "I am helping my schoolfellow." "Has he been hurt?" "So it seems." "Hurt indeed," said one of them, stooping down and examining Eugene closely. "This boy has been wounded in the temple. Who wounded him?" "Not I," stammered the puppet breathlessly. "If it was not you, who did it?" "Not I," repeated Pinocchio. "And with what was he wounded?" "With this book," and the puppet picked up from the ground the treatise on arithmetic, bound in cardboard and parchment, and showed it to the soldier. "And to whom does this belong?" "To me." "That is enough. Nothing more is wanted. Get up and come with us at once." "But I—" "Come along with us." Before they left, the soldiers called some fishermen who were passing at that moment near the shore in their boat, and said to them, "We give this boy, who has been wounded in the head, in your charge. Carry him to your house and nurse him. Tomorrow we will come and see him." They then turned to Pinocchio, and having placed him between them, they said to him in a commanding voice, "Forward, and walk quickly, or it will be worse for you." Without requiring it to be repeated, the puppet set out along the road leading to the village. But the poor little devil hardly knew where he was. He thought he must be dreaming, and what a dreadful dream! He was beside himself. He saw double, his legs shook, his tongue clung to the roof of his mouth, and he could not utter a word. And yet, in the midst of his stupefaction and apathy, his heart was pierced by a cruel thorn. The thought that he would pass under the windows of the good fairy's house between the soldiers. He would rather have died. They had already reached the village when a gust of wind blew Pinocchio's cap off his head and carried it 10 yards off. "Will you permit me," said the puppet to the soldiers, "to go and get my cap?" "Go, then, but be quick about it." The puppet went and picked up his cap, but instead of putting it on his head, he took it between his teeth and began to run as hard as he could toward the seashore. The soldiers, thinking it would be difficult to overtake him, sent after him a large mastiff who had won the first prizes at all the dog races. Pinocchio ran, but the dog ran faster. The people came to their windows and crowded into the street in their anxiety to see the end of the desperate race. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 28. Pinocchio escapes being fried like a fish. There came a moment in this desperate race, a terrible moment, when Pinocchio thought himself lost. For Alidoro the Mastiff had run so swiftly that he had nearly come up with him. The puppet could hear the panting of the dreadful beast close behind him, and there was not a hand's breadth between them. He could even feel the dog's hot breath. Fortunately, the shore was close, and the sea but a few steps off. As soon as he reached the sands, the puppet made a wonderful leap. A frog could have done no better, and plunged into the water. Alidoro, on the contrary, wished to stop himself, but, carried away by the impetus of the race, he also went into the sea. The unfortunate dog could not swim, but he made great efforts to keep himself afloat with his paws. But the more he struggled, the farther he sank head downward under the water. When he rose to the surface again, his eyes were rolling with terror, and he barked out, "I am drowning! I am drowning!" "Drown!" shouted Pinocchio from a distance, seeing himself safe from all danger. "Help me, dear Pinocchio! Save me from death!" At that agonizing cry, the puppet, who had in reality an excellent heart, was moved with compassion, and turning to the dog, he said, "But if I save your life, will you promise to give me no further annoyance and not to run after me?" "I promise, I promise. Be quick for pity's sake, for if you delay another half-minute I shall be dead." Pinocchio hesitated, but remembering that his father had often told him that a good action is never lost, he swam to Alidoro, and taking hold of his tail with both hands, brought him safe and sound onto the dry sand of the beach. The poor dog could not stand. He had drunk so much salt water that he was like a balloon. The puppet, however, not wishing to trust him too far, thought it more prudent to jump again into the water. When he had swum some distance from the shore, he called out to the friend he had rescued, "Goodbye, Alidoro. A good journey to you, and take my compliments to all at home." "Goodbye, Pinocchio," answered the dog. "A thousand thanks for having saved my life. You have done me a great service, and in this world what is given is returned. If an occasion offers, I shall not forget it." Pinocchio swam on, keeping always near the land. At last he thought he had reached a safe place. Giving a look along the shore, he saw amongst the rocks a kind of cave from which a cloud of smoke was ascending. "In that cave," he said to himself, "there must be a fire. So much the better. I will go and dry and warm myself, and then we shall see." Having taken the resolution, he approached the rocks, but as he was going to climb up, he felt something under the water that rose higher and higher and carried him into the air. He tried to escape, but it was too late, for to his extreme surprise he found himself enclosed in a great net, together with a swarm of fish of every size and shape, who were flapping and struggling like so many despairing souls. At the same moment a fisherman came out of the cave. He was so ugly, so horribly ugly, that he looked like a sea monster. Instead of hair, his head was covered with a thick bush of green grass. His skin was green, his eyes were green, his long beard that came down to the ground was also green. He had the appearance of an immense lizard standing on its hind paws. When the fisherman had drawn his net out of the sea, he exclaimed with great satisfaction, "Thank heaven, and today I shall have a splendid feast of fish." "What a mercy that I am not a fish," said Pinocchio to himself, regaining a little courage. The netful of fish was carried into the cave, which was dark and smoky. In the middle of the cave a large frying pan full of oil was frying and sending out a smell of mushrooms that was suffocating. "Now we shall see what fish we have taken," said the green fisherman, and putting into the net an enormous hand, so out of all proportion that it looked like a baker's shovel, he pulled out a handful of fish. "These fish are good," he said, looking at them and smelling them complacently, and after he had smelled them, he threw them into a pan without water. He repeated the same operation many times, and as he drew out the fish his mouth watered, and he said, chuckling to himself, "What good whiting! What exquisite sardines! These soles are delicious, and these crabs excellent! What dear little anchovies!" The last to remain in the net was Pinocchio. No sooner had the fisherman taken him out than he opened his big green eyes with astonishment, and cried, half frightened, "What species of fish is this? Fish of this kind I never remember to have eaten." And he looked at him again attentively, and having examined him well all over, he ended by saying, "I know he must be a crawfish." Pinocchio, mortified at being mistaken for a crawfish, said in an angry voice, "A crawfish indeed! Do you take me for a crawfish? What treatment! Let me tell you that I am a puppet." "A puppet?" replied the fisherman. "To tell the truth, a puppet is quite a new fish for me. All the better. I shall eat you with greater pleasure." "Eat me? But will you understand that I am not a fish? Do you hear that I talk and reason as you do?" "That is quite true," said the fisherman, "and as I see that you are a fish possessed of the talent of talking and reasoning as I do, I will treat you with all the attention that is your due." "And this attention?" "In token of my friendship and particular regard, I will leave you the choice of how you would like to be cooked. Would you like to be fried in the frying pan, or would you prefer to be stewed with tomato sauce?" "To tell the truth," answered Pinocchio, "if I am to choose, I should prefer to be set at liberty and to return home." "You are joking. Do you imagine that I would lose the opportunity of tasting such a rare fish? It is not every day, I assure you, that a puppet fish is caught in these waters. Leave it to me. I will fry you in the frying pan with the other fish, and you will be quite satisfied. It is always consolation to be fried in company." At this speech the unhappy Pinocchio began to cry and scream, and to implore for mercy, and he said, sobbing, "How much better it would have been if I had gone to school! I would listen to my companions, and now I am paying for it." And he wriggled like an eel, and made indescribable efforts to slip out of the clutches of the green fisherman. But it was useless. The fisherman took a long strip of rush, and having bound his hands and feet as if he had been a sausage, he threw him into the pan with the other fish. He then fetched a wooden bowl full of flour, and began to flour them each in turn, and as soon as they were ready, he threw them into the frying pan. The first to dance in the boiling oil were the poor whitings. The crabs followed, then the sardines, then the soles, then the anchovies, and at last it was Pinocchio's turn. Seeing himself so near death, and such a horrible death, he was so frightened and trembled so violently that he had neither voice nor breath left for further entreaties. But the poor boy implored with his eyes. The green fisherman, however, without caring in the least, plunged him 5 or 6 times in the flour until he was white from head to foot and looked like a puppet made of plaster. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 29. He returns to the fairy's house. Just as the fisherman was on the point of throwing Pinocchio into the frying pan, a large dog entered the cave, enticed there by the strong and savory odor of fried fish. "Get out!" shouted the fisherman threateningly, holding the floured puppet in his hand. But the poor dog, who was as hungry as a wolf, whined and wagged his tail as much as to say, "Give me a mouthful of fish, and I will leave you in peace." "Get out, I tell you," repeated the fisherman, and he stretched out his leg to give him a kick. But the dog, who, when he was really hungry, would not stand trifling, turned upon him, growling and showing his terrible tusks. At that moment a little feeble voice was heard in the cave, saying entreatingly, "Save me, Alidoro! If you do not save me, I shall be fried." The dog recognized Pinocchio's voice and, to his extreme surprise, perceived that it proceeded from the floured bundle that the fisherman held in his hand. So what do you think he did? He made a spring, seized the bundle in his mouth, and, holding it gently between his teeth, he rushed out of the cave and was gone like a flash of lightning. The fisherman, furious at seeing a fish he was so anxious to eat snatched from him, ran after the dog, but he had not gone many steps when he was taken with a fit of coughing and had to give it up. Alidoro, when he had reached the path that led to the village, stopped and put his friend Pinocchio gently on the ground. "How much I have to thank you for," said the puppet. "There is no necessity," replied the dog. "You saved me, and I have now returned it. You know that we must all help each other in this world." "But how came you to come to the cave?" "I was lying on the shore, more dead than alive, when the wind brought to me the smell of fried fish. The smell excited my appetite, and I followed it up. If I had arrived a second later—" "Do not mention it," groaned Pinocchio, who was still trembling with fright. "Do not mention it. If you had arrived a second later, I should by this time have been fried, eaten, and digested. Brrr, it makes me shudder only to think of it." Alidoro, laughing, extended his right paw to the puppet, who shook it heartily in token of great friendship, and they then separated. The dog took the road home, and Pinocchio, left alone, went to a cottage not far off, and said to a little old man who was warming himself in the sun, "Tell me, good man, do you know anything of a poor boy called Eugene, who was wounded in the head?" "The boy was brought by some fishermen to this cottage, and now he is dead," interrupted Pinocchio with great sorrow. "No, he is alive, and has returned to his home." "Not really? Not really?" cried the puppet, dancing with delight. "Then the wound was not serious?" "It might have been very serious, and even fatal," answered the little old man, "for they threw a thick book bound in cardboard at his head." "And who threw it at him?" "One of his schoolfellows, a certain Pinocchio." "And who is this Pinocchio?" asked the puppet, pretending ignorance.
"They say that he is a bad boy, a vagabond, a regular good-for-nothing. Calumnies, all calumnies. Do you know this Pinocchio?"
By sight," answered the puppet.
"And what is your opinion of him?"
asked the little man. "He seems to me to be a very good boy, anxious to learn, and obedient and affectionate to his father and family." Whilst the puppet was firing off all these lies, he touched his nose, and perceived that it had lengthened more than a hand. Very much alarmed, he began to cry out, "Don't believe, good man, what I have been telling you. I know Pinocchio very well, and I can assure you that he is a very bad boy, disobedient and idle, who, instead of going to school, runs off with his companions to amuse himself." He had hardly finished speaking when his nose became shorter and returned to the same size that it was before.
"And why are you all covered with white?"
asked the old man suddenly. "I will tell you. Without observing it, I rubbed myself against a wall which had been freshly whitewashed," answered the puppet, ashamed to confess that he had been floured like a fish prepared for the frying pan.
"And what have you done with your jacket, your trousers, and your cap?"
"I met with robbers who took them from me. Tell me, good old man, could you perhaps give me some clothes to return home in?"
"My boy, as to clothes, I have nothing but a little sack in which I keep beans. If you wish for it, take it. There it is."
Pinocchio did not wait to be told twice. He took the sack at once, and with a pair of scissors he cut a hole at the end and at each side, and put it on like a shirt. And with this slight clothing he set off for the village. But as he went, he did not feel at all comfortable, so little so indeed that for a step forward he took another backwards, and he said, talking to himself, "How shall I present myself to my good little fairy? What will she say when she sees me? Will she forgive me this second escapade? Oh, I am sure that she will not forgive me, and deserves me right, for I am a rascal. I am always promising to correct myself, and I never keep my word." When he reached the village it was night and very dark. A storm had come on, and as the rain was coming down in torrents, he went straight to the fairy's house, resolved to knock at the door. But when he was there, his courage failed him, and instead of knocking, he ran away some 20 paces. He returned to the door a second time, and laid hold of the knocker, and, trembling, gave a little knock. He waited and waited. At last, after half an hour had passed, a window on the top floor was opened. The house was 4 stories high, and Pinocchio saw a big snail with a lighted candle on her head, looking out. She called to him, "Who is there at this hour?" "Is the fairy at home?" asked the puppet. "The fairy is asleep and must not be awakened. But who are you?" "It is I." "Who is I?" "Pinocchio." "And who is Pinocchio?" "The puppet who lives in the fairy's house." "Ah, I understand," said the snail. "Wait for me there. I will come down and open the door directly." "Be quick, for pity's sake, for I am dying of cold." "My boy, I am a snail, and snails are never in a hurry." An hour passed, and then 2, and the door was not opened. Pinocchio, who was wet through and through, and trembling from cold and fear, at last took courage and knocked again, and this time he knocked louder. At this second knock a window on the lower story opened, and the same snail appeared at it. "Beautiful little snail," cried Pinocchio from the street. "I have been waiting for 2 hours, and 2 hours on such a bad night seem longer than 2 years. Be quick, for pity's sake." "My boy," answered the calm little animal, "my boy, I am a snail, and snails are never in a hurry." And the window was shut again. Shortly afterwards midnight struck, then 1 o'clock, then 2 o'clock, and the door remained still closed. Pinocchio, at last, losing all patience, seized the knocker in a rage, intending to give it a blow that would resound through the house. But the knocker, which was iron, turned suddenly into an eel and, slipping out of his hands, disappeared in the stream of water that ran down the middle of the street. "Ah, is that it?" shouted Pinocchio, blind with rage. "Since the knocker has disappeared, I will kick instead with all my might." And, drawing back a little, he gave a tremendous kick against the house door. The blow was indeed so violent that his foot went through the wood and stuck, and when he tried to draw it back again it was trouble thrown away, for it remained fixed like a nail that had been hammered down. Think of poor Pinocchio! He was obliged to spend the remainder of the night with one foot on the ground and the other in the air. The following morning at daybreak the door was at last opened. The clever little snail had taken only 9 hours to come down from the 4th story to the house door. It is evident that her exertions must have been great. "What are you doing with your foot stuck in the door?" she asked the puppet. "It was an accident. Do try, beautiful little snail, if you cannot release me from this torture." "My boy, that is the work of a carpenter, and I have never been a carpenter." "Beg the fairy for me." "The fairy is asleep and must not be awakened." "But what do you suppose that I can do all day nailed to this door?" "Amuse yourself by counting the ants that pass down the street." "Bring me at least something to eat, for I am quite exhausted." "At once," said the snail. In fact, after 3 hours and a half, she returned to Pinocchio carrying a silver tray on her head. The tray contained a loaf of bread, a roast chicken, and 4 ripe apricots. "Here is the breakfast that the fairy has sent you," said the snail. The puppet felt very much comforted at the sight of these good things, but when he began to eat them, what was his disgust at making the discovery that the bread was plaster, the chicken cardboard, and the 4 apricots painted alabaster. He wanted to cry. In his desperation he tried to throw away the tray and all that was on it, but instead, either from grief or exhaustion, he fainted away. When he came to himself, he found that he was lying on a sofa, and the fairy was beside him. "I will pardon you once more," the fairy said, "but woe to you if you behave badly a 3rd time." Pinocchio promised and swore that he would study, and that for the future he would always conduct himself well. And he kept his word for the remainder of the year. Indeed, at the examinations before the holidays, he had the honor of being the first in the school, and his behavior in general was so satisfactory and praiseworthy that the fairy was very much pleased, and said to him, "Tomorrow your wish shall be gratified." "And what is that?" "Tomorrow you shall cease to be a wooden puppet, and you shall become a boy." No one who had not witnessed it could ever imagine Pinocchio's joy at this long sighed for good fortune. All his school fellows were to be invited for the following day to a grand breakfast at the fairy's house, that they might celebrate together the great event. The fairy had prepared 200 cups of coffee and milk, 400 rolls cut and buttered on each side. The day promised to be most happy and delightful, but, unfortunately, in the lives of puppets there is always a "but" that spoils everything. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 30. The Land of Boobies. Pinocchio, as was natural, asked the fairy's permission to go round the town to give out the invitations, and the fairy said to him, "Go if you like, and invite your companions for the breakfast tomorrow, but remember to return home before dark. Have you understood?" "I promise to be back in an hour," answered the puppet. "Take care, Pinocchio. Boys are always very ready to promise, but generally they are little given to keep their word." "But I am not like other boys. When I say a thing, I do it." "We shall see. If you are disobedient, so much the worse for you." "Why?" "Because boys who do not listen to the advice of those who know more than they do always meet with some misfortune or other." "I have experienced that," said Pinocchio, "but I shall never make that mistake again." "We shall see if that is true." Without saying more, the puppet took leave of his good fairy, who was like a mamma to him, and went out of the house singing and dancing. In less than an hour all his friends were invited. Some accepted at once heartily, others at first required pressing, but when they heard that the rolls to be eaten with the coffee were to be buttered on both sides, they ended by saying, "We will come also to do you a pleasure." Now I must tell you that amongst Pinocchio's friends and schoolfellows there was one that he greatly preferred and was very fond of. This boy's name was Romeo, but he always went by the nickname of Candlewick, because he was so thin, straight, and bright, like the new wick of a little nightlight. Candlewick was the laziest and the naughtiest boy in the school, but Pinocchio was devoted to him. He had indeed gone at once to his house to invite him to breakfast, but he had not found him. He returned a second time, but Candlewick was not there. He went a third time, but it was in vain. Where could he search for him? He looked here, there, and everywhere, and at last he saw him hiding on the porch of a peasant's cottage. "What are you doing there?" asked Pinocchio, coming up to him. "I am waiting for midnight to start away." "And where are you going?" "I am going to live in a country, the most delightful country in the world, a real land of sweetmeats." "And what is it called?" "It is called the Land of Boobies. Why do you not come too?" "I? No, never." "You are wrong, Pinocchio. If you do not come, you will repent it. Where could you find a better country for us boys? There are no schools there. There are no masters. There are no books. In that delightful land nobody ever studies. On Saturday there is never school, and every week consists of 6 Saturdays and 1 Sunday. Only think, the autumn holidays begin on the 1st of January and finish on the last day of December. That is the country for me. That is what all civilized countries should be like." "But how are the days spent in the Land of Boobies?" "They are spent in play and amusement from morning till night. When night comes, you go to bed, and recommence the same life in the morning. What do you think of it?" Said Pinocchio, and he shook his head slightly, as much as to say, "That is a life that I would also willingly lead." "Well, will you go with me? Yes or no? Resolve quickly." "No, no, no, and again no. I promised my good fairy to become a well-conducted boy, and I will keep my word. And as I see that the sun is setting, I must leave you at once and run away. Goodbye, and a pleasant journey to you." "Where are you rushing off to in such a hurry?" "Home. My good fairy wishes me to be back before dark." "Wait another 2 minutes." "It will make me too late." "Only 2 minutes." "And if the fairy scolds me?" "Let her scold. When she has scolded well, she will hold her tongue," said that rascal Candlewick. "And what are you going to do? Are you going alone or with companions?" "Alone, indeed not. There will be more than 100 boys." "And do you make the journey on foot?" "A coach will pass by shortly, which is to take me to that happy country." "What would I not give for the coach to pass by now!" "Why?" "That I might see you all start together." "Stay here a little longer, and you will see us." "No, no, I must go home." "Wait another 2 minutes." "I have already delayed too long. The fairy will be anxious about me." "Poor fairy! Is she afraid that the bats will eat you?" "But now," continued Pinocchio, "are you really certain that there are no schools in that country?" "Not even the shadow of one." "And no masters either?" "Not one." "And no one is ever made to study?" "Never, never, never." "What a delightful country!" said Pinocchio, his mouth watering. "What a delightful country! I have never been there, but I can quite imagine it. Why will you not come also?" "It is useless to tempt me. I promised my good fairy to become a sensible boy, and I will not break my word." "Goodbye, then, and give my compliments to all the boys at school if you meet them in the street." "Goodbye, Candlewick. A pleasant journey to you. Amuse yourself and think sometimes of your friends." Thus saying, the puppet made 2 steps to go, but then stopped, and turning to his friend, he inquired, "But are you quite certain that in that country all the weeks consist of 6 Saturdays and 1 Sunday?" "Most certainly." "But do you know for certain that the holidays begin on the 1st of January and finish on the last day of December?" "Assuredly." "What a delightful country!" repeated Pinocchio, looking enchanted. Then, with a resolute air, he added in a great hurry, "This time really goodbye, and a pleasant journey to you." "Goodbye." "When do you start?" "Shortly." "What a pity! If really it wanted only an hour to the time of your start, I should almost be tempted to wait." "And the fairy?" "It is already late. If I return home an hour sooner or later, it will be all the same." "Poor Pinocchio! And if the fairy scolds you?" "I must have patience. I will let her scold. When she has scolded well, she will hold her tongue." In the meantime, night had come on, and it was quite dark. Suddenly they saw in the distance a small light moving, and they heard a noise of talking and the sound of a trumpet, but so small and feeble that it resembled the hum of a mosquito. "Here it is!" shouted Candlewick, jumping to his feet. "What is it?" asked Pinocchio in a whisper. "It is the coach coming to take me. Now will you come, yes or no?" "But is it really true," asked the puppet, "that in that country boys are never obliged to study?" "Never, never, never." "What a delightful country! What a delightful country! What a delightful country!" End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 31. Pinocchio enjoys 5 months of happiness. At last the coach arrived, and it arrived without making the slightest noise, for its wheels were bound round with flax and rags. It was drawn by 12 pairs of donkeys, all the same size but of different colors. Some were gray, some white, some brindled like pepper and salt, and others had large stripes of yellow and blue. But the most extraordinary thing was this: the 12 pairs, that is, the 24 donkeys, instead of being shod like other beasts of burden, had on their feet men's boots made of white kid. And the coachman? Picture to yourself a little man broader than he was long, flabby and greasy like a lump of butter, with a small round face like an orange, a little mouth that was always laughing, and a soft caressing voice like a cat when she's trying to insinuate herself into the good graces of the mistress of the house. All the boys vied with each other in taking places in his coach, to be conducted to the land of boobies. The coach was, in fact, quite full of boys between 8 and 14 years old, heaped one upon another like herrings in a barrel. They were uncomfortable, packed closely together, and could hardly breathe, but nobody said, "Oh!" Nobody grumbled. The consolation of knowing that in a few hours they would reach a country where there were no books, no schools, and no masters, made them so happy and resigned that they felt neither fatigue nor inconvenience, neither hunger nor thirst, nor want of sleep. As soon as the coach had drawn up, the little man turned to Candlewick, and with 1,000 smirks and grimaces said to him, smiling, "Tell me, my fine boy, would you also like to go to that fortunate country?" "I certainly wish to go." "But I must warn you, my dear child, that there is not a place left in the coach. You can see for yourself that it is quite full." "No matter," replied Candlewick. "If there is no place inside, I will manage to sit on the springs." And giving a leap, he seated himself astride on the springs. "And you, my love," said the little man, turning in a flattering manner to Pinocchio, "what do you intend to do? Are you coming with us, or are you going to remain behind?" "I remain behind," answered Pinocchio. "I am going home. I intend to study, as all well-conducted boys do." "Much good may it do you." "Pinocchio," called out Candlewick, "listen to me. Come with us, and we shall have such fun." "No, no, no." "Come with us, and we shall have such fun," shouted in chorus 100 voices from inside of the coach. "But if I come with you, what will my good fairy say?" said the puppet, who was beginning to yield. "Do not trouble your head with melancholy thoughts. Consider only that we are going to a country where we shall be at liberty to run riot from morning till night." Pinocchio did not answer, but he sighed. He sighed again. He sighed for the 3rd time, and he said finally, "Make a little room for me, for I am coming too." "The places are all full," replied the little man, "but to show you how welcome you are, you shall have my seat on the box." "And you?" "Oh, I will go on foot." "No, indeed, I could not allow that. I would rather mount one of these donkeys," cried Pinocchio. Approaching the right-hand donkey of the first pair, he attempted to mount him, but the animal turned on him, and giving him a great blow in the stomach, rolled him over with his legs in the air. You can imagine the impertinent and immoderate laughter of all the boys who witnessed this scene. But the little man did not laugh. He approached the rebellious donkey, and, pretending to give him a kiss, bit off half of his ear. Pinocchio, in the meantime, had gotten up from the ground in a fury, and with a spring he seated himself on the poor animal's back. And he sprang so well that the boys stopped laughing and began to shout, "Hurrah, Pinocchio!" And they clapped their hands and applauded him as if they would never finish. Now that Pinocchio was mounted, the coach started. Whilst the donkeys were galloping and the coach was rattling over the stones of the high road, the puppet thought that he heard a low voice that was scarcely audible, saying to him, "Poor fool! You would follow your own way, but you will repent it." Pinocchio, feeling almost frightened, looked from side to side to try and discover where these words could come from, but he saw nobody. The donkeys galloped, the coach rattled, the boys inside slept, Candlewick snored like a dormouse, and the little man seated on the box sang between his teeth, "During the night all sleep, but I sleep never." After they had gone another mile, Pinocchio heard the same little low voice saying to him, "Bear in mind, simpleton, boys who refuse to study and turn their backs upon books, schools, and masters, to pass their time in play and amusement, sooner or later come to a bad end. I know it by experience, and I can tell you. A day will come when you will weep as I am weeping now, but then it will be too late." On hearing these words, whispered very softly, the puppet, more frightened than ever, sprang down from the back of his donkey and went and took hold of his mouth. Imagine his surprise when he found that the donkey was crying like a boy. "Sir Coachman," cried Pinocchio to the little man, "here is an extraordinary thing. This donkey is crying." "Let him cry. He will laugh when he is a bridegroom." "But have you by chance taught him to talk?" "No, but he spent 3 years in a company of learned dogs, and he learned to mutter a few words." "Poor beast!" "Come, come," said the little man, "don't let us waste time in seeing a donkey cry. Mount him and let us go on. The night is cold and the road is long." Pinocchio obeyed without another word. In the morning, about daybreak, they arrived safely in the land of boobies. It was a country unlike any other country in the world. The population was composed entirely of boys. The oldest were 14, and the youngest scarcely 8 years old. In the streets there was such merriment, noise, and shouting that it was enough to turn anybody's head. There were troops of boys everywhere. Some were playing with nuts, some with battledores, some with balls. Some rode velocipedes, others wooden horses. A party were playing at hide and seek, a few were chasing each other. Some were reciting, some singing, some leaping. Some were amusing themselves with walking on their hands with their feet in the air. Others were trundling hoops or strutting about dressed as generals, wearing leaf helmets and commanding a squadron of cardboard soldiers. Some were laughing, some shouting, some were calling out. Others clapped their hands or whistled or clucked like a hen who had just laid an egg. In every square canvas theaters had been erected, and they were crowded with boys from morning till evening. On the walls of the houses there were inscriptions written in charcoal. "Long live playthings! We will have no more schools! Down with arithmetic!" and similar other fine sentiments, all in bad spelling. Pinocchio, Candlewick, and the other boys who had made the journey with the little man had scarcely set foot in the town before they were in the thick of the tumult, and I need not tell you that in a few minutes they had made acquaintance with everybody. Where could happier or more contented boys be found? In the midst of continual games and every variety of amusement, the hours, the days, and the weeks passed like lightning. "Oh, what a delightful life!" said Pinocchio, whenever by chance he met Candlewick. "See, then, if I was not right," replied the other. "And to think that you did not want to come! To think that you had taken it into your head to return home to your fairy, and to lose your time in studying! If you are this moment free from the bother of books and school, you must acknowledge that you owe it to me, to my advice, and to my persuasions. It is only friends who know how to render such great services." "It is true, Candlewick. If I am now a really happy boy, it is all your doing. But do you know what the master used to say when he talked to me of you? He always said to me, 'Do not associate with that rascal Candlewick, for he is a bad companion, and will only lead you into mischief.'" "Poor master," replied the other, shaking his head. "I know only too well that he disliked me, and amused himself by calumniating me, but I am generous, and I forgive him." "Noble soul!" said Pinocchio, embracing his friend affectionately and kissing him between the eyes. This delightful life had gone on for 5 months. The days had been entirely spent in play and amusement, without a thought of books or school, when one morning Pinocchio awoke to a most disagreeable surprise that put him into a very bad humor. End of Chapter 31. Chapter 32 of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 32. Pinocchio turns into a donkey. The surprise was that Pinocchio, when he awoke, scratched his head, and in scratching his head he discovered to his great astonishment that his ears had grown more than a hand. You know that the puppet from his birth had always had very small ears, so small that they were not visible to the naked eye. You can imagine then what he felt when he found that during the night his ears had become so long that they seemed like 2 brooms. He went at once in search of a glass that he might look at himself, but not being able to find one, he filled the basin of his washing stand with water, and he saw reflected what he certainly would never have wished to see. He saw his head embellished with a magnificent pair of donkey's ears. Only think of poor Pinocchio's sorrow, shame, and despair. He began to cry and roar, and he beat his head against the wall, but the more he cried, the longer his ears grew. They grew and grew, and became hairy toward the points. At the sound of his loud outcries, a beautiful little marmot that lived on the first floor came into the room. Seeing the puppet in such grief, she asked earnestly, "What has happened to you, my dear fellow lodger?" "I am ill, my dear little marmot, very ill, and my illness frightens me. Do you understand counting a pulse?" "A little." "Then feel and see if by chance I have got fever." The little marmot raised her right forepaw, and, after having felt Pinocchio's pulse, she said to him, sighing, "My friend, I am grieved to be obliged to give you bad news." "What is it?" "You have got a very bad fever." "What fever is it?" "It is donkey fever." "That is a fever that I do not understand," said the puppet, but he understood it only too well. "Then I will explain it to you," said the marmot. "You must know that in 2 or 3 hours you will be no longer a puppet or a boy." "Then what shall I be?" "In 2 or 3 hours you will become really and truly a little donkey, like those that draw carts and carry cabbages and salad to market." "Oh, unfortunate that I am! Unfortunate that I am!" cried Pinocchio, seizing his 2 ears with his hands, and pulling them and tearing them furiously, as if they had been someone else's ears. "My dear boy," said the Marmot, by way of consoling him, "you can do nothing. It is destiny. It is written in the decrees of wisdom that all boys who are lazy, and who take a dislike to books, to schools, and to masters, and who pass their time in amusement, games, and diversions, must end sooner or later by becoming transformed into so many little donkeys."
"But is it really so?"
asked the puppet, sobbing. "It is indeed only too true, and tears are now useless. You should have thought of it sooner."
"But it was not my fault. Believe me, little Marmot, the fault was all Candlewick's."
"And who is this Candlewick?"
"One of my schoolfellows. I wanted to return home. I wanted to be obedient. I wished to study. But Candlewick said to me, 'Why should you bother yourself by studying? Why should you go to school? Come with us instead to the land of boobies. There we shall none of us have to learn. There we shall amuse ourselves from morning to night, and we shall always be merry.'"
"And why did you follow the advice of that false friend, of that bad companion?"
"Why? Because, my dear little Marmot, I am a puppet with no sense and with no heart. Ah, if I had had the least heart, I should never have left that good fairy who loved me like a mamma, and who had done so much for me. And I would be no longer a puppet, for I would by this time have become a little boy like so many others. But if I meet Candlewick, woe to him! He shall hear what I think of him." And he turned to go out. But when he reached the door, he remembered his donkey's ears, and feeling ashamed to show them in public, what do you think he did? He took a big cotton cap, and putting it on his head, he pulled it well down over the point of his nose. He then set out and went everywhere in search of Candlewick. He looked for him in the streets, in the squares, in the little theaters, in every possible place, but he could not find him. He inquired for him of everybody he met, but no one had seen him. He then went to seek him at his house, and having reached the door, he knocked. "Who is there?" asked Candlewick from within. "It is I," answered the puppet. "Wait a moment, and I will let you in." After half an hour the door was opened, and imagine Pinocchio's feelings when, upon going into the room, he saw his friend Candlewick with a big cotton cap on his head, which came down over his nose. At the sight of that cap, Pinocchio felt almost consoled, and thought to himself, "Has my friend got the same illness that I have? Is he also suffering from donkey fever?" And pretending to have observed nothing, he asked him, smiling, "How are you, my dear Candlewick?" "Very well as a mouse in a Parmesan cheese." "Are you saying that seriously?" "Why should I tell you a lie?" "Excuse me, but why then do you keep that cotton cap on your head which covers up your ears?" "The doctor ordered me to wear it because I have hurt this knee. And you, dear puppet, why have you got on that cotton cap pulled down over your nose?" "The doctor prescribed it because I have grazed my foot." "Oh, poor Pinocchio! Oh, poor Candlewick!" After these words a long silence followed, during which the two friends did nothing but look mockingly at each other. At last the puppet said in a soft voice to his companion, "Satisfy my curiosity, my dear Candlewick. Have you ever suffered from disease of the ears?" "Never." "And you?" "Never. Only since this morning one of my ears aches." "Mine is also paining me." "You also? And which of your ears hurts you?" "Both of them." "And you?"
Both of them. Have we got the same illness? I fear so. Will you do me a kindness, Candlewick? Willingly, with all my heart. Will you let me see your ears? Why not? But first, my dear Pinocchio, I should like to see yours. No, you must be first. No, dear, first you, and then I. Well, said the puppet, let us come to an agreement like good friends. Let us hear it. We will both take off our caps at the same moment. Do you agree? I agree. Then attention, and Pinocchio began to count in a loud voice. 1, 2, 3. At the word 3, the two boys took off their caps and threw them into the air. And then a scene followed that would seem incredible if it were not true. That is, that when Pinocchio and Candlewick discovered that they were both struck with the same misfortune, instead of feeling full of mortification and grief, they began to prick their ungainly ears, and to make 1,000 antics, and they ended by going into bursts of laughter. And they laughed, and laughed, and laughed, until they had to hold themselves together. But in the midst of their merriment, Candlewick suddenly stopped, staggered, and changing color, said to his friend, Help, help, Pinocchio! What is the matter with you? Alas, I can no longer stand upright. Neither can I, exclaimed Pinocchio, tottering and beginning to cry. And whilst they were talking, they both doubled up and began to run round the room on their hands and feet. And as they ran, their hands became hoofs, their faces lengthened into muzzles, and their backs became covered with a light gray hairy coat sprinkled with black. But do you know what was the worst moment for these two wretched boys? The worst and the most humiliating moment was when their tails grew. Vanquished by shame and sorrow, they wept and lamented their fate. Oh, if they had but been wiser! But instead of sighs and lamentations, they could only bray like asses, and they brayed loudly, and said in chorus, Hee-haw! Whilst this was going on, someone knocked at the door, and a voice on the outside said, Open the door. I am the little man, I am the coachman who brought you to this country. Open up at once, or it will be worse for you. End of chapter 32.